Hello everyone and welcome to this artist talk that is part of a series Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx Mexican that is part of an art show that Soul Collective organized and was funded in part by the Gente Somos Chicanos Art Fund and this artist talk for today we have an amazing artist, cultural worker, and activist. And today we have Gilda Posada, and I'm gonna read a little bit about Gilda Posada. And thank you, Gilda, for being here with us. And Gilda Posada is a Chicanx cultural worker from Southeast LA. She received her Bachelor of Arts from UC Davis in Chicana and Chicano Studies and Comparative Literature. Posada graduated with a dual degree from California College of the Arts with an MFA and an M.A. in Visual and Critical Studies. She served as the curator for Galería de la Raza in San Francisco, California, and assistant director for Taller del Arte Nuevo Amanecer in Woodland, California. Currently, Posada is a PhD candidate in the History of Art program at Cornell University. As a practicing artist and curator, Gilda Posada creates visual works and interventions that engage contemporary Chicanx art world and emerge from the methodological framework of the Chicanx movement. During the past 12 years, Gilda has exhibited on national and international scale, most notably in the Contemporary Native Art Biennale in Canada. Thank you, Gilda, for being with us. Gilda has worked before with Soul Collective, and we appreciate her work a lot. Maybe you have seen her work over there in Sacramento. Last year, in collaboration with Soul Collective, we put some of her artwork in downtown Sacramento. And also we have worked with other artists that from Taller de Arte Nuevo Amanecer, where Gilda was serving as director for some time, and we are very happy tonight for having them with us to present an artist talk. And Gilda, thank you very much, and I pass the microphone to you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm Gilda. Thank you for showing up on this Tuesday to hear me talk a little bit about my work. I really appreciate your time and energy. I know that folks have long days and are zoomed out a lot. Luis, if I can have access to share my screen, please. I'll get started with my PowerPoint. There we go. So hi, this is my social media. I just put it on here because I always forget to just give folks my information, but you're free to follow me if you're on Instagram or if you just want to check out my website. A lot of the work that I'm showing here is downloadable for folks who just want to print it out or have access to it in their own way. So you can always find higher resolutions on the website if you are interested in anything you might see in this PowerPoint. So I always start off with talking about myself and how I got here to begin with. So I have this photo of my abuelita, Petra, who's still living in Nayarit in Mexico, which is where my matriarchal family is from. So this is her, and then my aunt in front of their maize. But basically, my family came here during the 80s, mostly seeking asylum from the economic hardships that were hitting our family back in the rancho. So my mom, who is here, came to the US, and that is where she met my father. My father comes from El Salvador. So I am half Chicana, half Central American Salvadoreña artist. And although my dad wasn't as involved in my life, I think that him coming and seeking refuge from the Civil War in El Salvador did shape a lot of my life and how my relationships, at least with growing up, and how I experienced LA as a first kind of generation Chicana, not necessarily knowing how to navigate any institutions, having to navigate K through 12 on my own, being on ESL and hooked on phonics for the majority of my school, just because our family didn't come from that so-called American experience. But eventually, I did grow up to be one out of all of us in here to get into the UC system. I have no idea how, and I have no idea why that was me, but I did end up coming to UC Davis. And unfortunately, that wasn't a privilege that most of my cousins that I grew up with had. Um, they they're all walking and trying to figure out their own journey, I guess. But for me, that meant that I ended up at UC Davis, that I had no idea where that was. I just knew that I had to leave home, that I couldn't stay there any longer. Mostly because there was a lot of expectations and just gender, familial expectations for me to fulfill that I don't think that I was ready for, or that I really wanted that life for myself. And so I decided, well, UC Davis is probably the better alternative for whatever reason. And that's how I ended up at UC Davis. And at UC Davis, when I got here, I had no idea what I was doing as an undergrad. I had no idea one, what Chicano was. I had no idea what art making was. I came here as an English literature major. I very quickly realized that it was my education and I was able to learn whatever I wanted. And that was kind of the first time I was able to make that choice for myself about what I wanted to learn and where I wanted to go with my future. So one thing I did to keep me humble or with my roots, I took one Chicano studies course every quarter since I got here, just because there was a big culture shock. Having grown up around mostly Mexican and Black folks in Southeast LA. And the demographics at Davis are very different. And so I took Chicano studies courses, and that's when I stumbled upon the SoCStream course at UC Davis offered through Chicano studies. That Malaquias was transitioning to Carlos Jackson at the time. Malaquias was retiring and Carlos Jackson was stepping in to fulfill that role. And so this is where I learned how to do printmaking. This is, by the way, one little layout I printed today just to show you in case you don't know what printmaking is. But essentially, you create this image in the classes, at least. It's a political printmaking course. So you would select an image and then pair it with something you want to say. That was the assignment. It just had to be political. It didn't have any other requirements. So to me, when I took this class, I was finally able to bridge a lot of the stuff I was learning institutionally at UC Davis to talk about my own experience, things like, okay, maybe being queer or like intersectionality, right? Or the socioeconomics that led us to live the way that we lived then, a lot of things that I didn't have the language to basically translate. And part of my biggest frustration being at the university was that I was learning all these things, but at the same time, I felt like that knowledge wasn't necessarily accessible to the people back home, whether that was my mom or my cousins or my brother. I wanted them to be able to receive that knowledge themselves, but also make them feel empowered the way I was feeling empowered. And so when I took this course at UC Davis, silk screening makes sense to me because I was able to relate my messages visually, but also add the text. And maybe even if you didn't understand the language or weren't able to read, you could still understand the message through whatever was being represented. And so that's how I kept printing and printing, because for me, it made sense, especially coming from someone where my mom only went up to second grade and she didn't have access to education the way I did. But at the same time, she had numerous amounts of knowledge that she taught me that wasn't necessarily honored by the university. So screen printing really became a way for me to bridge those things together. So this is a layout I made, like I said earlier, it's for some equitable project that's going on. But essentially you create your stencils, which is the red stuff from Ruby, and then you expose it in a dark room. Here's my exposure happening with the screen. And then you wash out your screen, and that's how you get your stencil onto the screen. And then you print each layer separately, eventually arriving at this kind of finished product where it all ties in together. So this is the print I printed today, just to kind of guide you through in case you don't know what printmaking is like. You're just building colors on colors on colors. And what is beautiful about this process is that you're able to make either 10 prints, or you can make thousands and thousands of prints like we have in the past. It's just a matter of going in there and giving yourself the time and space in the studio. But I'm jumping a little bit ahead by showing you that. What I was learning, I was learning how to print. At the same time, I was also learning about the amazing history that Chicanos have been using screen printing with, starting right from the civil rights movement to even previously, and all the influences from the Mexican Revolution and even Cuban prints. But for me, what always stood out is that culture has been part of the movement, and artists have been at the center of self-determination and liberation, not just for ourselves, but also for our community and family and our homes in mind, Always with love as kind of the end goal, and also the journey that guides us. So for myself, reading these founding documents, Plan de Santa Bárbara and Plan Espiritual de Aztlán, which are two of the major important documents in the Chicano movement. And I'm sorry if my students are watching this because I make you read them. But for me, it's been really, I always go back and reflect on these documents and what the purpose of art is and how it can serve our communities, and also what my responsibility as an artist or as a Chicana is. And so these are just some guiding questions that I have for myself that I think can apply, I guess. If they apply to you, you're more than welcome to reflect on them. But for me, I always reflect on, okay, who have we been? Who have been told we are? And how is that true to me, Who am I? And how might that be different than who we've been? And where are we today? Also, what has been gained? What can continue to be gained? But at the same time, what is it that we carry that might be a burden that's problematic that we can let go of? Because for me, part of, as much as I love to learn, I also have to unlearn and try to become a better person. At least I hope. So letting go can be good, That can apply to homophobia, that could apply to machismo, and it could apply to so many things that are still happening within our community. So not to say I'm the most perfect artist out there, because I'm also in process, but sometimes toxic things aren't super normalized, and we all come with a lot of trauma, and sometimes we don't even know that we might be projecting that or walking that, and saying it onto others or acting in not healthy ways. When we are talking about social change and liberation, sometimes we can be the perpetrators of our own oppression, so to say. And so really my questions when I make a print is, okay, what can I offer where I am now? And how can I simultaneously offer hope towards building a better world, so to say? And how can I use my experience to speak truth to that? Because for me, firsthand accounts are always the most important, because we have lived those things, and who better than us to speak our truths? I don't see myself as the voice of the voiceless or anything like that. I see myself as just walking my way, and hopefully others relating to it and trying to teach folks how to do things that maybe I know how to do, and also walking alongside folks, because I think that's important to be able to support and continue to build our communities. So yeah, that's kind of like my, I guess, methods and what I always keep in mind when I'm working as an artist. Of course, aesthetically, I also am just like an art nerd and super fangirl after design, especially when it has to do with pre-Columbian art or political art that comes from the Americas in particular, that has been somewhat of an effort to decolonize. These have included OSPAL, the Organization Solidarity for Peoples of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, who came about in Havana, Cuba, after the OSPA conference for the first time, including Latin America. For me, these social movements really became important in that they are more so giving us an example about unity, but also asking us to care and put our reflections in the larger world and what's at stake, and how we are accountable as people to people's right outside of the US, back in our homelands, or even people maybe we might not have met, but that we need to be responsible for. And that includes, of course, war, social change, climate change, all of those things occurring that sometimes we think we can't do anything about. I think for me, OSPAL has been a great example of how to be accountable and responsible, but also be an ally, and how to be an ally in those ways and not speak over people, but augment their politics and what it is they're trying to say. And of course, my great-grandfather, I always make this joke, he's not really my great-grandfather, but Jose Guadalupe Posada, and his usage of calaveras have been super influential, just in the way that he influenced Chicanx art as a whole. And I mean, anytime you see Calavera, Day of the Dead, all of those indigenous practices, going back to the indigenous figurines and looking inward rather than looking to European aesthetics to tell our stories. And the civil rights movement, especially the Black liberation movement, artists like Emory Douglas have been super influential towards my own aesthetic, especially in that I think he taught me to give myself permission to not be afraid and speak back, speak truth to power, so to say, to not be scared to put my politics out there when I see something wrong and when I see something that's harming my community, learning how to work, one, use my voice, but also put my own beliefs out there, because sometimes some things are very wrong and dehumanizing, and being able to say, no, it's okay to protect you and yours and your community is okay. So for that, I am very, very grateful to Emory Douglas, and of course, just other Chicano artists who have come before me. That includes the artists in Chicanx Park, and who did the work of going back to Mexico and other parts of the America to bring back the indigenous, to bring back ceremonies, and to bring back those practices, those histories, and those artists that now we know a lot about, including Frida Kahlo, for example. And just Chicanas, and Chicana Indígena artists are my main, I think, influence to not be afraid, especially artists like Yolanda Lopez and Judy Baca, Erenia Cervantes, Celia Herrera Rodriguez. All of those women have just taught me to stand my ground and to not be afraid. Like, people are going to disagree with you a lot, and people are going to try to scare you back into the closet, so to say. And it's okay to hold firm, and just the most important thing you can keep doing is keep making and keep pushing. And of course, reflect and practice as you go on to walk in a good way. And I know she's here. So I want to also say thank you to Melanie Cervantes, because Melanie was the first Chicana artist I ever met in real life. Prior to this, I only knew men. And when I met Melanie, my world changed because I didn't know that it was possible for Chicana printmakers to exist in this world. And Melanie was really generous with me and welcomed me and even bought some of my really bad prints. I'm sorry, Melanie, they're really bad. My early prints, but you know, she supported me. And I think at a very young age, that makes you feel validated and that makes you feel seen. And I think Chicana supporting Chicana artists is so important, especially in a field like printmaking, where we don't have a lot of Chicana printmakers doing this work that's also very machista world, whether we like to admit it or not. So this was an event that Melanie coordinated and invited Olivia Chucha and I to go and print. And this was my print for that. So yeah, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but these are like my early prints that are kind of unregistered. But I was kind of exploring or trying to do some Ospal kind of influences in here. I was also learning about Palestine at the time and trying to find my voice, and at the same time being very angry and mad at the injustices in the world. That includes the US-Mexico border, but at the same time, with Palestine, there's a lot of parallels, especially with indigenous dispossession and very similar struggles that we go through. And so Palestine really became one important to me, but also the Palestinian community, working with them. I think it opened my eyes to being a little bit more international and putting my politics out there, not just when it came to my community, but how it is that we unite as a whole and create larger numbers and greater change, hopefully. These are just more prints that I made in my undergrad kind of career, my Esperanza series, where I became obsessed with learning about Latin America and all the liberation movements that were happening. But at the time, I wasn't necessarily aware that everyone I was reading and everyone I was looking at, and mostly everyone that was influential, so to say, were men, until very later in my life. 2009, Taller Arte Nuevo Amanecer opened, and I was the first undergrad that was hired out there to work alongside Carlos Jackson to create the programming. Essentially, Carlos Malaquias did a lot of work to open up the building, but once we got the keys, built the tables and all those things, there was no outline and there was no blueprint as to what we wanted to do. And so I worked with Carlos to go door to door across the street. This is located across Section 8 housing in Yolo County in Woodland, California, where the majority are is 80% Chicano Latino and then 20% Black and then like point something percent other. So I would go across the street and I just invited everyone to come out, just letting myself be known. And slowly but surely, we created this workshop of printmaking where essentially we taught the printmaking class that was offered at UC Davis, where I learned how to print, and taught it to community members. And this is where I began to work with young women. And I quickly realized that, oh my God, I am their role model. I am someone they look up to. And that is something I had never thought of myself as. And so that gave me a new responsibility that I think ended up changing the way I made art and related to it. This is when we invited Melanie. Hi, Melanie, again, Titana to have a show. But essentially, eventually I arrived, I think, okay, these women are looking to me. It's not just their children, but it's also engaging with señoras, right? Engaging with someone's mom. How do I represent that? How do I gain their trust? How do I make art that's accessible to all of them? This is Rosa, and this is her self-portrait that she made. It's actually Rosa. I have this print here for a reason. That got me into pattern making, which is the majority of my work till this day. She made this pattern because she was a mother of three and she wanted kind of like the three arrows and to repeat it in her portrait to kind of speak to her as an individual and then her as a mother. And after that, I was also in the space with Adelita, who was offering danza. And that began to influence my work with all her teachings. And I began including pattern. And at the same time, the young women who were in my life and putting them into print because I saw them as like the future, as this amazing, powerful force that maybe didn't even know how beautiful and powerful they were, but to me, they were everything, right? That's the reason why we were there. And that's the reason why I had hope. And so when I went to get my MFA, eventually that became the core of my work, where I worked with first generation Chicanas to make a healing project, so to say, about our experiences as first generation, about growing up in a lot of times Central American or Mesoamerican families where we were expected to fulfill certain roles. And eventually I took these photos of my friends or family members, and I began making patterns about their identities and where they came from, meaning where their parents came from. So I would ask them for objects or just specifics of the town or photos they had in their home, and they would give them to me. And then I would take certain patterns from those things and essentially make like a portrait kind of thing, a pattern of them. And this is what ended up becoming my MFA work, where it was literally a pattern of my friends or my relatives. And then they would choose a quote that spoke to them about liberation or about consciousness or about who they are that helped them heal. And I meshed them together with organza. So this is the MFA work and how it looks. Organza, again, marrying the textile kind of world with the printmaking world, one which is very theme oriented, the other very male kind of dominated. So again, kind of breaking those rules, so to say. So afterwards, I began exploring a little bit more about women who continue to influence my life. As always, I've always been an art nerd and also a literature nerd. And I think more than anything, seeking healing from all the trauma and everything that rips us and is made to make us feel embarrassed or ashamed. And Audre Lorde, right, is one of them. And fast forward a little bit, Trump goes into office and everybody panics. And I think that day was so depressing for anyone who's a BIPOC person in this country. It just reaffirmed everything we already knew about racism existing in our lives and no one believing us. And so I made these, I reached out to my friends whose patterns they were, and I asked them if they would want to offer like a message that I can print. And I gave these posters out in a lot of the rallies that were happening at the time and protests. So these are just a few of them. You're both a hate crime, destroy white supremacy, ban fascists, Muslims are welcome here, sanctuary cities on every corner. And the list goes on and on. It's still like an ongoing project because white supremacy, unfortunately, has no end within this world. And then at the same time, I made this billboard, the Abolish Borders billboard, or Derrumba las Fronteras, which says Muslims are welcome here in both Farsi and Arabic. This is because Trump implemented the travel ban right after he became president. And one thing my family, being a mixed family, has always taught me is that borders have no place in this world, and that borders are not going to stop us from being people, and we're not going to let them dehumanize us. And well, at least my mom has always said, right, that those things are made for us to feel inferior, and they're made to remind us that we don't belong here, but that those things also are foreign to this land and to this country. And so this, of course, comes from a lot of trauma and a lot of pain where my family hasn't been able to go back home to see their mother, but also as someone who is able to have a little bit more privilege and have papers, I can feel a little more bold with my messages and be able to speak for a lot of the trauma and a lot of the pain that my family has suffered through this, and many other families continue to suffer. So this pattern is after my cousin, who is also one who doesn't have papers. So it's also like kind of an honor of her. This is where my mom and my aunt came to visit. So this is my mom and this is my aunt. It's actually one of the first times they ever see my art and liked my art. So for me, that was very validating. Mom was kind of at the end of this, but what Luis was talking about with the collaboration with Soul Collective was with when Black Lives Matter happened or the George Floyd incident happened. I mean, the death of Black and Brown people have been at the hands of police and institutional racism has existed, but I think we saw it a little bit more, or at least it became more into the public realm into 2020. So I made these prints because everything was locked down and we had access to the studio at Tana. And we just made these prints to go support people who were out on the streets. And so this is the Soul Collective installation that they collaborated with. It was out in Sacramento, but we actually gave like 10,000 of these prints away. These are a few of my designs, but Eddie Lankin, who also works at Tana, these are a few that he made. And then other students who were there at the time with us were printing. And these are just some prints in action. But those are just a few prints. The memorial series that I have is unfortunately more than just the George Floyd print. Especially when it comes to Black and Brown folks, we see them demonized and dehumanized by the media, and as if they deserve to die because of who they were, no matter if they are children or if they were just right in a convenience store. They always try to flip the narrative. So these are just a few. I use pattern because pattern for me honors and goes back to the roots of our beauty and where we belong and who we belong to. But also, I think I want to offer a different side of them and beautify them for everything they did and what they meant to folks when they were alive. And then other things during COVID, I've been doing some Virgen Tonantzin, still playing with migration because that's just an ongoing trauma that still traumatizes me. And the more I do it, I think hopefully one day they're gonna see my poster and they're gonna be like, take the border down. I don't know. That's the goal. That's my hope. I know it's not gonna happen, but one friend can't hurt, right? So I've also just been saying a lot of prayers, especially for the family separations that have happened under the last administration, because I mean, I'm so lucky, right, that my mom was able to stay with me even whatever happened with my dad, but I know many children don't have that option, and many are even been broken away from their families before they can even crawl or talk. And so this is just a prayer for them, but it's also honoring the strong mamas who come and risk everything to give their children a better future and come into the unknown and risk it all for them. So I just wanted to honor them. And then this is a collaboration with Susie Cepeda, who teaches at UC Davis, teaches decolonizing spirit. Susie has been such a wonderful influence on my life in helping me heal and talk about my traumas and making me feel okay about not being okay, and just saying it's never too late to embark on your journey towards decolonization and healing and just reconnecting with your indigenous roots. So I made, once again, the Virgen Tonantzin, and this is a prayer that Susie wrote out because I think I'm more of a visual person and sometimes I can't quite put into words what I need to say. So this is her rezo that she offered, and then she offers a song, Tierra es mi cuerpo, earth is my body, Tlalina Cayolo. I won't sing it because I'm a visual artist, not a singer, but this is just something we were offering folks who maybe had lost someone to COVID, or were out there being an essential worker who, you know, said a prayer before going out there prior to the vaccine existing. And there's more prayer cards to come, hopefully. I just need to find the time and space to do that, but we're also working on one for pregnant folks who are on the journey, right, towards creating life and bringing other lives into this world, saying a prayer for them. I know COVID has changed, but I think, you know, going into the hospital, giving birth and all those things are still very complicated. So we just want to offer prayers wherever we can and offer good thoughts and good energies towards them. This is my latest and last print I'll show. It's a portrait of me and sage and lavender and romero and pericon, with the Coatlicue and the Tlatliputli, the male energy and the female energy of the earth. Lately, again, I'm a person and I have so many issues and I have so much trauma in me that I've been trying to find ways to calm my spirit and just let go, but also at the same time rely on the earth in order to guide me and offer some of that healing. So returning back to reconnecting, because I think that's such a colonial intervention to remove us from land and plants, and just having a connection with the earth in general. So me and Marina, who's a Tana intern, started a little herb garden at Tana in the back. We popped up boxes and that's been what we've been doing. Just trying to grow some hierbas and drying them and using them and offering them wherever we can, cleansing ourselves and, you know, whatever we can offer. That's been recently what I've been doing. And then I gave myself the Koyoshauki bells, because if there's one thing I am, is the daughter of Koyoshauki, of that rebellious spirit, who's fragmented, but also trying to piece themselves together and walk in a good way, like I've been saying. Yeah, that's a little bit about my work. Thank you for listening and thank you for coming. I'll stop sharing and I can answer anything anyone wants to ask.
Thank you very much, Gilda. That was amazing to know more details about your artwork and also about your art process. If anybody has any question, you're welcome to put your question in the chat room, or if you would like, you can unmute yourself and also ask a question. Thank you very much. While somebody else is ready to ask a question, something I would like to know is like, how was the process when you were printing with in Tana with other people to create the posters that you were giving away for free? Was there many community members, students involved in helping?
Yeah, so Tana, I mean, it's still ongoing. It's free and open to anyone who's 13 and older. They go by the quarter system, so anyone is welcome. Mostly I work with a lot of high school youth because we lured them in with community service hours. Um, but they they got to make their 20 prints and then they gave them out away to the community. But we also, at the end of each session, had an art show where they would invite their families to come out. And we still do this, right? We've been collaborating. Well, I say we, but Marisela, who's here, she's an intern at Tana now, and she's also currently my student in the Chai class. But she's been working with the Cache Creek High School kids to make prints. So it's, you know, it's a matter of whoever wants to come out and collaborate. It's open and free to people from the community. So if you are interested, if you're in the area, it's free and open. Definitely check out the Tana page. I'll put it in the chat if anyone's interested in following them on Instagram.
Cool. Thank you. There is a couple of questions in the chat. One is there an art form that you haven't tried that interests you?
Yeah, so when I was at CCA, I took a ceramics class and I was only able to partially do this, but I wanted to print my patterns on newsprint and transfer them onto the ceramics. I wasn't that good at ceramics, so it didn't quite turn out the way I wanted, but I think that more so, especially with Dia de los Muertos, I've been doing a lot of altar installations, and I would like to integrate some more, I think, ceramics and earthy materials onto those projects. Um, I I've been also been working with Celia Rodriguez to print in the studio when she comes up, and she's always challenging me because she prints on different materials. So like tissue papers or like amate. That's actually how I started printing on amate because Celia brought a stack of amates and she was like, do this. So I've been definitely being pushed to get away from the paper, or even when it is in the paper, add texture, fold it the way I present prints. So I think I'm really interested in that and undoing some of that colonial trauma, or even moving away from the European kind of live on paper or live on canvas. So trying to challenge myself, how can I bring the earth to the work and integrate it all? And I think maybe clay is the way to do that, but I still need help with clay. So if anyone is into ceramics, hit me up. What was your experience like in the MFA as a Chicanx artist? Um, that was very difficult. To be honest, it was very racist and it was tough. There was times where I was like, I don't even want an MFA anymore. Um, I had I was one of three out of about 60 people. There was three of us. There were, there was Keith, who was indigenous, and Tom Gray Eyes, and then there was like me, and everyone else was white. So they would say a lot of racist things to me. Like they would always tell me, well, I don't understand your art. Because there's no entryway for me into your art. So there was a lot of microaggressions as well. But I think ultimately what saved me in my MFA was that I was working in Galería La Raza and I was working at the Mission Cultural Center. And when I got there to those spaces, I was very quickly very humbled because I realized, okay, this is who I'm doing my work for, right? I need to get out of my head with that institutional critique, because ultimately I'm not being an artist to sell my work or for capital gain. I'm doing this work to try to heal, and try to heal me, but also my communities, and try to just offer them a different tool and way to see themselves and for them to express themselves. And I think for me, that was a reminder, who am I doing this for? And what is my ultimate goal? And after I realized that, I was like, okay. I started telling white people when they tell me something racist, I'm like, that's actually very problematic and that's actually very racist. So I started standing up for myself. Because people in community also saw me in that way, and I think it was my responsibility, and that made me open my eyes. So whoever wants to go for an MFA, I always say do it, and don't drink the Kool-Aid. Don't believe everything they say. Always remember why you're going there. And of course, I have more stories. If anyone wants more MFA advice, more than happy to guide you through that. let's see. Do I find it more difficult to print on paper rather than fabric? So all of my fabric is actually digital printing. It's done through Photoshop and Illustrator. So I also had to teach myself how to use those. So there is a digital and also a handmade component to those organza prints that I make, which also makes them kind of psychedelic because of all the color I'm able to include when they do mesh with that print. The only problem is that printing on fabric is really expensive in the digital realm. So that is something I have to figure out if I want to keep making organza prints because it doesn't come for free. But you could print on fabric. You can print t-shirts, you can print totes, same process. You just need a heat dryer. If you want to learn more, I can teach you how to do that, Maricela. What has been your favorite and most challenging print to make? Thank you, Myra. My most challenging print to make, I think is actually the latest one I showed you because I am at a very vulnerable state in my life. I think I've experienced recently like a lot of trauma and I think a lot of susto where I stopped making art for a while and I wasn't necessarily myself and I knew that there was something wrong with me. And also the pandemic happened and I think that traumatized a lot of us and how we function in the world. So I think I had to be a little bit forgiving for myself, but also look at myself internally and how I've grown, who I want to be, and also recognize kind of these fragments in my life. But also at the same time, remind myself, this is beautiful and it's a journey. And as long as you're walking, right, that path, that's all I need to do. And that's all I'm kind of responsible for. Hopefully everything else falls into place after that. But trying to be a good person is hard. And trying to not, project that onto others is also very hard. And at the same time, I have responsibilities and I have students that I have to teach and I'm trying to be a good example. And sometimes I'm not a good example. So that prayer made me really come to myself and be like, okay, I need to heal. I need to give myself and my spirit a limpia, right? And I need to drink my teas and I need to put into practice singing the songs and really relying on the earth and going on my walks every day if I'm really going to do this and I'm going to be telling people to do this. So yeah, thank you for listening and asking me about my trauma, Myra. What is your favorite part during the process of printmaking? My favorite part, he says, is actually when I come up with the design. Because once I know what symbols and what stories, I can begin to visualize it and see it come together. Of course, the last layer is always super exciting because that's the moment we've all been waiting for. And you can't put your first color on Instagram because someone's going to be excited because they're just going to be like, this is just a blob of color. Everyone always wants to be there more so for the last color. But for me, to be quite honest, the journey of making your print and struggling through that and the whole process of it is more of a kind of ceremonial practice for me, where I'm in my body, I'm reflecting on whatever my trauma is that I'm trying to work out, or I'm reflecting on that issue that I'm making a print about. So when I was making the George Floyd print, for example, I felt useless. I felt like, well, what can I do? Right? I'm not a cop. I don't even like cops. Okay. Like I don't even support that system. But at the same time, I also knew that there was a lot of pain and I knew all the horrible things they were saying about George Floyd. And I knew he had a daughter. And I kept, when I was making the print, I just kept thinking about what happens to that child when she grows up and she looks for her father online, and she just finds these horrible articles or like these horrible stories that are being told in the trial about her dad. That's not how she should remember him. That's not how she should see him. So I just, kept working my way through that, trying to say, okay, right, I'm doing this, yes, because maybe it's the only thing I can offer, but also because it deserves to be out there in this beautiful way for someone else that, might encounter it someday, hopefully. So yeah, I guess the process, I love it. Within itself, I get kind of sad when I actually finish my prints, because then I'm like, oh damn, now I gotta start all over with another topic. How did you take care of your energy as you were making your memorial print series? Um, I think for that, I allow myself to cry, and I allow myself to really be vulnerable. If you know me, you know that like I'm a double Virgo and like a Sagittarius, and I don't like to cry. Um, I do, but I think in those ways, I allow myself to just be open and to let it out, because there's those topics and those deaths are so heavy, right? Like I'm thinking about like the Alan Toledo print. He was just 13 years old, right? And the police are like, he was a criminal, he was a gangbanger. But to me, um, he was like anyone else, any one of us who were at that age doing really stupid things, right? I was a troubled youth growing up. I was doing things I shouldn't have been doing. I was hanging out with people I shouldn't have been hanging out with. And that wasn't my mom's fault, right? She was just a single parent working two jobs. She didn't even know what the hell I was doing. But I think for me, what mattered in that print was that one, I, as Gilda, got the opportunity to grow up and for those fuck ups not to kill me, right? To be able to mess up and to eventually find my way to healing in whatever journey that was and however long that took me. I was able to arrive at that, and I was able to meet people that told me, hey, look, come save yourself, right? Here's this drum, here's this song, here's this event, come join us, right? I was giving that opportunity, and my heart hurt mostly because his mom was being blamed, but also because he would never have that. He never had the chance. And for me, that just reminded me of all my cousins, my brothers, right? People who haven't had the chance just because they were boxed into this kind of criminal identity. Um, so yeah, it was hard, right? But I think for me, it's also good to go there. I like going there because it allows me to let it out, and it allows me to heal that darkness rather than staying stuck with it. I allow myself to release it in the process. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Hilda, for sharing this information. And yeah, just I like this idea. Like many artists that get involved with bringing what they see happening in their communities into their artwork, they use that as a way to liberate themselves of that anger, frustration that they feel inside. But at the same time, what they produce are things that really inspire the community to do different things, mobilize, organize, and that's something wonderful. That's the gift that artists can give to their communities, and I appreciate your gift and sharing with the community.
Thank you. There's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of shame, and there's a lot of isms and phobias, and hopefully, I know it's one paper, but I like to think that even that little paper can save lives, right? It can save our spirits, it can heal us, if you just allow yourself to go there. And I thank everyone who has supported me in my journey. I know there's a lot of my students in here, even them, because they push me, right? They push me to be better and they push me to be accountable. And they also teach me their lingo and how to be relevant to them. And I appreciate it because it's about them, right? It's we're just trying to leave a better world, and we're just trying to leave it better than we found it, hopefully. And I thank you from the bottom of my soul, everyone who has helped me do that with my life and given me the opportunity and space to serve as that. Gracias.
Gracias. Um, Thank you, Gilda. Thank everyone that joined us today. And this artist talks will continue. On Thursday, we will have Luis Garcia, professor from Sacramento State. He will be, besides the talk, he will be doing a short demonstration on how to use Loteria to challenge racial issues and other issues in the classroom. So you're welcome to join us. And I'll put the link on the chat where you can find out the different links to the virtual exhibition that we put together to accompany this series of talks, and also links to register to the different artist talks that are happening. Thank you once again for joining us tonight. Thank you, Gilda. Good night. Have a nice rest of your evening. Thank you very much for being here, supporting Soul Collective.